This is Geek Gab with your host, Daddy Warpig. We are back. Geek Gab for Monday, June 8th, 2026. And today we are going to be talking about Apple TV's prestige sci-fi television spectacular. No, not Foundation. No, not Severance. No, not the space invasion one whose name I just can't remember. But man, they have got a lot of sci-fi prestige TV going on over on Apple TV, and they get a lot of praise from critics, but they're just not my kind of TV shows that I like my sci-fi to be. Honestly, I like my sci-fi more Matrix and OG Star Wars, not modern Star Wars. Heavens no. More Matrix and OG Star Wars than, the original Star Trek the Motion Picture. That was just 15 minutes of floating through V'ger's cloud was just too much for me. I'm just not into that slow operatic kind of sci-fi. I just don't have the patience for it. As a little kid, I sat there and watched it mainly because I wanted to get to the part where it got good. Tron, when I was a little kid, was great because they had talkie parts and they had character development parts, but then they would give you something awesome like the tank shooting bits or the motorcycle combat scenes or the disc battles or the high ally battles, and it was awesome. It was wonderful, and of course, it had all the pseudo 3D animation computer things and some real 3D computer animation things. Fantastic movie. So I can stand talkie bits if there's not too much of them, but a lot of shows just have way too much talkie bits and not enough action. So, anyways, this show, Geek Gab, Warpig watches For All Mankind. And this is what they call, for reasons that I will never understand, historical fiction. And it is science fiction primarily by being nice to people who write it. It is alternate timeline fiction. Now, For All Mankind is actually real science fiction in addition to being alternate timeline fiction, because it's all about the space race in an alternate history where the Soviet Union won the race to the moon, and America put a little bit more effort into the moon race than as a result of this. And so we not only landed on the moon, we built a fully functioning moon colony and made several discoveries. They discovered helium-3 on the moon, which became a wonder fuel, and made several advances. We had a scuffle, that is to say, an actual open combat briefly with the Soviet Union on the moon, which threatened to start World War III a nuclear exchange, but that was, and I'm going to have to tell you, folks, we're going to be, I'm going to be giving spoilers for this TV series because although season 5 just barely ended, so I'm going to avoid spoiling season 5. All of these other seasons have been out for several years. So there's going to be some incidental spoilers here and there. I'm going to try not to give away any major plot points, but there's definitely going to be spoilers for other seasons. So each season covers a primary major event in this alternate timeline. And then they jump forward a decade to the next major event. So the first season is the 1960s, and America trying to get back into the space race to not just land on the moon, but establish a base on the moon. And then the second season is the 1970s, where we not only have a base on the moon, we have a moon colony. And then we jump forward into the 1980s and the race to get to Mars. And then the race to, establish a colony on Mars. And then in this latest season, there is an effort because of relations with Earth for the Martian colonists to successfully declare their independence from Earth and how that all goes down. So the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and then 2000s and 2010. And in between episodes, there's sometimes jumps of like 6 months or a year and a half, just depending on what they need to do to move forward to the next critical event in the storyline they're exploring. So let me back off to an even bigger overview than the big overview I just gave you. The question is the show entertaining? And mostly yes. It's 10 episodes a season for the last 4 seasons. There's a few more episodes for the first season. And by and large, they avoid what Netflix does, where in a Netflix show, they're writing a 13-hour movie instead of 13 individual episodes. And that 13-hour movie has a lot of filler in it. And it just doesn't work unless you have really crackerjack writers who are aiming for high levels of excellence and know how to make each episode work as an individual episode. For a lot of episodes that are just marking time, and it's a big problem with and I've said this before, Netflix drew all the wrong conclusions from binge watching TV. They just, the model they went for once they realized people like to binge watch TV is just not the right model for making good television, for making compelling television, for making television that keeps people watching from episode to episode. They just assumed they don't have to make each episode compelling and draw people back. And so, For All Mankind doesn't do that. Every episode has at least one, and usually more, significant events that are happening that are strong events, that are tough events, that are challenges for characters that they have to overcome. In one episode, there's an astronaut played by Joel Kinnaman flying to the moon, and he has to perform a really tricky landing to land on the moon. And his son gets hit by a car, and his wife has to deal with the issue of whether or not to tell him that his son is in a coma, that he has a subdural hematoma, which means he's got bleeding on the brain, that they've drilled a hole in his skull to let the blood come out, and that the doctors do not know if his son's going to recover or live. And she's dealing with that question. And at the same time, all of the astronauts are saying, no, we're going to tell him, we have to tell him. And she's saying, no. She comes to a decision. She says, no, we are absolutely not going to tell him. He's dealing with enough stuff up there, and this is just going to crush him at a time when he needs to be absolutely focused on the mission. And so that's a big event in the show. The situations that led up to the event, him getting involved in a lot of mischief at school, him getting involved in fights, him throwing cherry bombs down school toilets and blowing them up, just all of this rebellion, and his mom saying, no, you're grounded, you're not going to be playing basketball at the school, you need to stay home. And then him rebelling against his mom and getting on a bike and driving off, and then getting hit on his way to the game. All of these things are not just dealing with the event of him getting hit. They're dealing with the mom having her husband away for months at a time on these extended lunar missions, on the mom dealing with because her husband is the head of the space program at NASA, head of the astronaut program that picks all the astronauts for the mission, and that's involved in training new astronauts. That means that she's the head of all the wives on the base. So any problems on the base go through her. And when astronauts get killed in training or get killed in orbit, she has to organize the support for the funeral. She has to organize the potluck. She has to organize women to come over and make food for the family. It is just this huge job, and it's a lot of stress and strain. And they show the things that are going on at home with the wives, but also with the politics, with NASA trying to get funding from a government that's always on the verge of either taking away NASA's budget or cutting it way back or abandoning the space race, because congressmen are always wanting to get money for their own districts. And then you find out that and this is a little spoiler, you find out that one of the things that happened that killed these astronauts, that she's trying to console all of the wives of, is that politics got played under a certain president. Because politics got played, a company that shouldn't have been making certain parts was given a contract so they could get support from a governor for a completely different, unrelated constitutional amendment. And then they produced shoddy parts, and those shoddy parts got put into the rocket and they failed, and the rocket blew up, and 3 astronauts were killed. So the show has a lot going on in every episode. So you don't get this filler episodes. They've done very well to avoid filler episodes. And you, as a viewer, may not be enthralled with every single plot thread. That, that's only to be expected if you're not excited for one character's particular journey. Now, but there are enough plot threads going on that you might find, if you enjoy the show at all, it's because you find whatever a majority of the plot threads interesting or whatever. It is a disappointment because the last 15 years of television, comics, movies, AAA video games, and indie video games, and music, and every other kind of politics and entertainment and news media and what have you that I haven't remembered to talk about has been caught up in what I call the generation of suck. And let me explain. They talk about generations as being 20 years, but as recently as the baby boomers and Generation Jones, which is the latter part of the baby boomers, cultural generations, not reproductive generations, but cultural generations like Gen X and Gen Y and millennials and Gen Z and on and on. They have tended to last about 15 years because technology and the culture is changing so fast that time has gotten compressed. So when I talk about the generation of suck, I'm not talking about Gen Z or millennials or any group of people. I am talking about a cultural phenomenon that's lasted right now since 2012. So it's about 14 years, but it's going to be 15 years next year. And what it seems to be happening in my mind is that the companies and the individuals who created the generation of suck are in large part going out of business. They're burning out. Marvel and DC, I heard a rumor, I have no idea if this is true. Someone said that they were thinking of consolidating their universes. If that's true, and I have no idea that that's true, that would be an example of the consolidation that's hit the big 5 publishers, which used to be the big 6, which used to be even more, and they keep consolidating because they keep going out of business. Indie comics publishers are having a hard time in going out of business. And I feel genuinely sorry for that because a lot of these are people who are trying to do a good job and deliver entertaining product and not deliver political diatribes. But when the big two entered the generation of suck and decided to just steer into it and go fully all for suck and make nothing but political polemics with terrible art and awful, painfully awful scripts, and drive comic stores out of business and flood comic stores with so many different titles that they pushed all the indies off the shelves. It drove people out of buying comics. Comics they are selling in issue numbers that would have been instantly canceled during the 80s and early 90s. And even during the so-called comics collapse in the late 90s, they were still selling far more than even marquee titles today. So these comic shops are going out of business. Indie comics are indie comic publishers are going out of business. Dark Horse is getting out of the comic publishing business. Dark Horse Comics, who used to be a powerhouse of second or third tier comics behind Marvel and DC. And Marvel and DC have been losing sales for 15 years, 14 years. So the generation of suck is killing businesses. All the AAA video game companies who are having Chinese Tencent come in and buying up not majority shares, but large portions of it because they needed an infusion of cash. And our French pals who over there making Ghost Recon and Assassin's Creed and all those games are on the verge of bankruptcy because they're making games that suck. Activision bought Blizzard and then was bought out by Microsoft because they're making games that suck. Blizzard is making games that suck. BioWare is making games that suck. Bungie is making games that suck. We've had a recent discussion about Concord, $400 million, which is an unimaginable sum. That's a monstrous budget. If you compare that to budgets for Hollywood movies, that's huge. And it lasted 2 weeks, flopped. They shut it down after 2 weeks, had to give refunds to all the customers. That is a mega flop. That is a bigger and floppier flop than anything Hollywood has ever produced. Okay? All the movies they call the biggest flops Hollywood has ever made, Sony pulled a bigger flop in Concord. Put that on your radar. Metropolis, the big flop from a couple of years ago, not as big a flop as Concord. Waterworld, that everyone laughed at, only cost $200 million and it made over $100 million. Not as big a flop as Concord. Furiosa, more successful than Concord. All of these companies are pouring money down a hole because of politics. Politics makes you stupid. As a creator, going in with an ideology first idea means you make crap. So, back to talking about For All Mankind. They go a long way to trying to make For All Mankind fair to both sides in the political spectrum of the United States. And it's a very United States focused show because it's about the space race between the Soviet Union and America. And the Soviet Union lasts at least up until the 2010s, which is the latest season. For example, I'm just going to give one example. At one point, President Al Gore says that he took the lead in discovering this asteroid that's ultra rich in iridium, which was actually discovered by the Soviet Union. And both countries need to work together to capture this asteroid so it can be brought into an orbit where it can be mined and all the minerals on it can be brought to Earth to be used in vast new applications that will enrich basically everybody's lives on the planet. This causes a massive problem that has to be worked around. NASA has to, bow and scrape to the Soviets. It is presented as a monumental gaffe, and it is obviously a takeoff on out for those of you who remember. Sorry, I'm old. I'm old enough to remember when Al Gore said, I took the initiative in, leading the creation of the internet when I was in the Senate. That's a paraphrase. And if the show was being completely politically, ideologically committed to one side, it would not have done that. However, there is a phenomenon in the media where the most noble and decent Republican is the last Republican to run for president, and the worst, most evil Republican in the world is the current Republican who is running for president. So the most evil person in the world was Mitt Romney until Trump came along, and then Mitt Romney became a virtuous angel that we look back on with honor and glory. But when Mitt Romney was running, he was totally evil, and the most virtuous Republican was the senator from Arizona. But when he was running for president, the most virtuous person was George Bush. But when he was president, he was absolutely evil, and the most virtuous Republican was the other senator, whose name I can't remember because this is in the middle of the 90s. And when he was running for president, the most virtuous Republican was the previous Bush. And when Bush was running, he was the absolute Satan, and the most virtuous Republican was Reagan. But when Reagan was running, he was absolutely evil. What I'm saying is that saying bad things about Gore isn't all that even-handed because Gore doesn't matter anymore. Now, and Simon Hogwood said it's going to be so funny watching people long for good old Donald Trump when Vance or Rubio or whoever is president. There have already been a couple of articles published talking about Vance running for president after Donald Trump, saying that Vance is even worse than Trump. Already happened, already published. Came out last year. So when your usefulness is past, it's okay to talk you down. Bill Clinton didn't get elected president in this alternate timeline, and part of the reason why was he was sleeping around. The other reason why is because the Republican candidate was a woman space hero who was secretly a lesbian, and she came out during her presidency. So, although the show does go somewhat to making it appear even-handed, there is still a heavy political undertone. That is the icing on the cake, is appearing even-handed. This last season was all about Earth and the Republican president on Earth stomping down on Mars, and about workers uniting and rising up and fighting off the Soviet Union. The previous season was about workers organizing in a union in order to get fair wages on Mars. And the previous season from that is all about how the capitalist there was a three-way race for to get to Mars. There was the Soviet Union, Earth, and the capitalist spaceship. And the capitalists refused to go rescue the Soviets when their craft blew up. And the brave American, led by a woman of color, went and rescued the Soviets and had this horrible accident, but they won the race for Mars anyway. Whereas the capitalist ship, piloted by the other American astronaut hero that she replaced, lost the race, and because he was a toxic masculine white male. And it is better at hiding its politics than many shows that have been out. And it's better at, I think, that the people making this show are genuinely and honestly trying to be even-handed. I think they are genuinely and honestly trying to make a show that's fair to everybody. I think that from their point of view, they are making a show that's fair to everybody. It's just they're so embedded in the culture that they come from that they see the world in their specific way, and they genuinely believe that they're not malicious, they're not angry, they're not abusive, they don't talk down to religious people, they don't talk down to Men, they don't talk down to the audience. They do not hate the audience, and that has been a big um, component of the generation of suck. Is a lot of the people making video games or comics or movies genuinely hate the audience. They hate the audience for comics and want to swap them out for a different audience because they think that middle aged white men buying comics are lame. They hate them. They want to swap them out for a younger, hipper, urban crowd. They want to swap them out for the kind of people who listen to hip hop or listen to world music or go to Trader Joe's and people who wear like hip clothes. They want to swap them out for cool people because they genuinely hate the audience for comics. They want to see themselves as the kind of people that make cool stuff for cool people. The people who make For All Mankind do not hate the audience. And that is a critical importance. So, yes, there is a very deep political view buried in this show. But I don't think it's deliberate propaganda. I think it's a product of how the people who made it see the world. And I don't think they're capable of making it any other way. I think they are genuinely trying to be fair to everybody. And this is just the only stories they can tell. They have to tell stories about NASA hiring a bunch of women pilots after the Soviets won the space race because NASA needs to do something to grab the world's attention to make a first. So they're going to have the first woman on the moon. That's what the first season's about. America can't be the first on the moon anymore. So they're going to be, so the Soviets land the first woman on the moon ahead of NASA. So NASA has to, put the first woman on the moon and then show the world that they can get there too. So they hire they go out and they get a bunch of female pilots and put them through astronaut training. And they have to tell that story because they have to tell stories about people they see as marginalized minorities being given a chance in this alternate universe where they weren't given a chance in Apollo in our world. And even though NASA had female astronauts on space shuttle missions, this had them going earlier, and it included black astronauts, black female astronauts, and so on and so forth. So then they have an illegal alien who comes to the country and is just enamored with space and wants to go to space, and she's a poor girl from Mexico. His mother died when she was young, and her father gets deported, and she gets to stay in America because of Reagan's amnesty. And she turns out that she's an engineering and math super genius. And so, because of this woman at NASA, she gets hired at NASA and starts working there as an engineer because she's a prodigy who is just, 5 or 10 years ahead of everybody else. in terms of learning engineering and physics and math and stuff. And so she becomes a really major central character on the show. Um, and in the fifth season, she ends up going to Mars and being a critical character in this. Um, they're declaring their independence from Earth. There's a revolution. Sorry, I hope that's not a real spoiler. But if you didn't know that was coming, then you know you're not familiar with American cultural memes and what declaring independence from Earth will obviously involve, um, or a rebellion, not a revolution, a rebellion. Um, so they have these. Um, I just think that dealing with characters like this is just what they have to do. I don't think they have it in them to do it any other way. And it doesn't seem to be a take that to the audience. It doesn't seem to be malicious. It just seems to be what they do, but it's definitely their politics. Um, so whether or not you can enjoy this show depends on whether or not you can get around the fact that a good 75% of the show is just heavily political by default, even though it's not in a way that they hate you who have different politics. They don't hate you, it's just their point of view. And I'm trying to present their point of view. I'm trying to present their show fairly. I'm not ranting against it. I'm not calling them names. I'm not trying to present them as being something else other than what they are. Um, I know a lot of people who do not share their political point of view on YouTube might be ranting about calling it DEI or calling it modern audience or whatever. I think that would be unfair to the people who made this show. I think that would be unfair to what they were actually doing in the show. Um, and if you disagree with their politics past a certain point, you will not enjoy the show. I want to be fair and make that clear. If you disagree past a certain point with their politics, you will not enjoy the show. If you can handle, or if it doesn't bother you what their politics are, then you can enjoy the show, and that'll be cool. So it all depends on what you find tolerable. So is the show enjoyable? Setting the politics aside, there's a lot about the show that is enjoyable. A lot of the drama is human. People are allowed to be human. People are allowed to make mistakes. They do not except in uh, a couple of instances. It gets worse towards the final season. Um, season 5, uh, they completely neuter one of the main characters of the show has been a competent hero up until then. Um, and I don't know that it was called for in the story, but there are many male characters who are heroic. Um, I don't know. Yes, white male characters kind of take it on the chin. When you need someone who fails or who um, doesn't uh, hold up under pressure, probably a white male. Then again, the evil capitalist from season 3 on is uh, is a black man. So they are genuinely trying to be fair, I think, within their limitations of their point of view. So I don't know. There's a lot of entertaining things in the show. There's a lot of good things in the show. There's a lot of honest human emotion in the show. But it is, but the people who made the show are um, captive to their politics. And there is precisely one um, of those typical scenes that come up in every show that's about coming out, where everybody sits around and completely reverses all the characterization up to that point and uh, tells the gay person who's coming out that they're the most brave person in the world, that they're braver than the astronauts who've been risking their lives up to that point, that everything they're doing is 100% right, that making the entire 10-person crew mission all about them was absolutely the right thing to do and the bravest thing that they could ever have done. So yeah, that happens. And that's really obnoxious. It happened once in one Dresden Files novel. Um, it happened in this show. It's a cultural mainstay at this point, and it's obnoxious. Rather than just letting people be people, everybody has to endorse. They did it in season 5 of Stranger Things. They gathered the whole cast together to tell Will Byers, one by one, tell him how awesome it is to be gay, whether that made sense or not for the story. And it just took so much time. I think somebody said it was like 15 minutes. Um, just killed the pace of that episode. Um, so yeah, I don't know. It's a mixed. I can't give it a recommendation because of all the things that are dreary and burdensome about it. The politics are dreary and burdensome. It would have been better if they had just made a nice show, a good show. On the other hand, the performances are strong. The show is interesting. Um, Much of what they do with the alternate history is good. Some of it is um, kind of not so interesting, and the ending of the 5th season, they've had a character who's been a problem all during the 4th season and 5th season, and then like right towards the end when he's going to cause really big trouble for some characters, they just abruptly kill him um, for no reason. It's just right out of the blue. Um, and they basically have some other characters look over and say, "Whoops, that happened," and walk away. And it's like, it's a complete dramatic womp womp flop. They don't have any payoff to that thread that was building up. Nothing is said, nothing is done. You've spent the whole season with a new character, and that's her entire story, and it just kind of ends. And then the season comes to an end. And the fifth season has had by far the worst writing. So they've been renewed for a sixth and final season coming out in 2027. We'll have to see how that goes. And they started a spin-off series called Star City about the Russian side of this space race, which really is completely uninteresting to me. I just don't care what the Russians were doing. So it's a mixed bag. It's a mixed review leaning towards most people who are listening to the show should probably skip it. And I realize I've been thinking this through as I've been giving the review. I didn't really have an exact verdict in mind. But then again, the last episode just came out last week, so and I saw it on Sunday, so saw the last episode yesterday. So I'm still kind of chewing over the last season. So yeah, that's For All Mankind. I wish I could say, hey, this is a incredibly awesome, great show, and there's a lot of good things in it, but there's a lot of not so good things too. Well, we've got 8 minutes left, and it looks like I'm going to be cutting the show off early because I don't have anything to talk about. I really had hoped I would be able to review Backrooms and Obsession, but I'm hoping to get to those next week. By hook or by crook, I am probably going to have to hijack a car and have them drive me to the theater in order to get to those movies and review them. Both of them obviously doing gangbusters. And as I said on X.com, Yellow Hallways beat Star Wars. So that's really painful to consider. Yellow Hallways beat Star Wars. Very, very difficult. Very difficult to contemplate that Star Wars has collapsed so far in our cultural cachet and our cultural imaginations that a copy pasta born on 4chan, given life on the internet, that kind of faded out, made by an indie production for $750,000, beat a Star Wars movie at the theater and has gone on to make over $100 million. The director is talking about making a Portal movie and is talking with Valve about it. And I, for one, it looks like he's got some skill as a director to build up a movie about Backrooms like this. So I'm looking forward. I would like to see what he does with Portal. Because it just seems like somebody who can handle the Backrooms might be able to make Chell's story from the first Portal movie interesting. So, all right, folks. Obviously, that depends on whether or not Gabe or Valve gives him the go-ahead to adapt it into a movie. But I think if done correctly, the special effects of the portal, the companion cube, and GLaDOS would be hilarious to see. Of course, it would also mean a resurgence of the cake is a lie as a meme, and I don't know if the human race can survive another burst of the cake is a lie memes. We'll just have to hope and pray that the human race has enough fortitude, has enough strength of will that however many die off with that kind of psychic assault unleashed, that the rest of us can forge on in the aftermath, in the hellscape that will be left, rebuild civilization, and go ahead and maybe make better art than this generation of suck that we're still stuck in. And I'm hoping that that obsession and the back rooms are both signs that we have a new generation of filmmakers who can spring up outside the Hollywood system and make great movies. And that the Hollywood system, as with all these other companies that are going out of business, can supplant the companies going out of business, and that other creators can come forth and supplant these other places going out of business, and we can let the people who have been destroying and despoiling our culture for the last almost 15 years just go away. Let them fade away, let them burn out, let them burn their companies to the ground, and other people can come along and make new things. And of course, like I've been posting on Twitter, my secret project is going forward. I'm making progress just about every day, and we are. It is fantastic, and I look forward to the time. Probably not for a couple of years, when I'm able to show people what I've created. So, all right. This has been Geek Gab for Monday, June 8th, 2026. I'm your host, Daddy Warpig. I want to thank everyone who's been listening live. I want to thank everyone who will listen later. This has been my review of, well, practically the entire pop culture of America and the globe, and also for all mankind. Thanks, everybody who tuned in to listen live. Thanks, everybody who will tune in and listen later. We are signing off for today. But don't you worry. Don't you fret. I will be back.